The NZXT H5 Flow has only been around for a couple of years, but NZXT has already decided that it's time for a refresh. So now there is a new H5 Flow with enhanced airflow and GPU cooling from a redesigned floor, power supply shroud and side panels that provide increased airflow throughout the case and specifically targeting the graphics card. So does this mean the new H5 Flow is better than the old one? Let's find out. So this is the new NZXT H5 Flow. It's an updated version of the already available H5 Flow and there's been quite a few changes. This is currently available to purchase now. You can get it in black or white in this standard version, or you can get it in black and white in an RGB version that comes with RGB fans. The standard version is available at scan for $89.99 in either black or white, and the RGB version in white is $109.99, or currently at scan it's reduced to $99.98 for the black version. The NZXT H5 Flow features enhanced airflow and GPU cooling via the power supply shroud, which is perforated on the top and side to enable air intake from 220mm fans. To increase airflow throughout the case, the H5 Flow has ultrafine mesh front, top and side vented panels. It supports up to a 360mm radiator in the front and up to 240mm at the top, as well as up to 820mm fans. The case comes pre-installed with two NZXT 120mm F120Q airflow fans, one in the front and one in the rear for instant out-of-the-box cooling performance, and cables can be routed effortlessly in the right-hand side via the wide channels and held in neatly using the included hooks and straps. So let's take a look at this case a bit closer and see what changes NZXT has made to the H5 Flow. We'll start at the front. It's a large ultrafine mesh vented panel at the front of the case. This obviously acts as a panel for good airflow through in from the front, and also as a dust filter with it being ultra fine mesh. Easy to remove the front panel. It just simply pops off there, just on some quick release fittings. You can see it's completely mesh, ultra fine mesh, so it needs no additional dust filter. The mesh acts as a dust filter as well. You can see just behind there is a 120mm fan that comes pre-installed. The top of the case is also ultra fine mesh, and this top panel removes with just a single thumb screw at the back. Then you pull the panel backwards and it releases. Again, you can see ultrafine mesh on the top panel, so again you don't need a dust filter in the top. The front I/O is quite sparse on the H5 Flow. I know NZXT likes its understated and minimalist design, but minimalists can sometimes become impractical, and just having a single USB 3.2 Type A port and a single USB 3.2 Type C port, it seems like NZXT has chosen aesthetics over function. With this case, I would like to see at least two Type A ports along with the Type C port up there. There is also a 3.5mm combined audio jack and a power button. Side panel removes easily too. There's a small tab at the back. You just push it out. There's no screws that hold this in place at all. Releases very easily. And on this white version, it's completely clear tempered glass. The black version has a smoke tempered glass side panel. Right hand side panel is held in place with a couple of thumb screws. Release those, slide the panel back a little, and then that removes. You can see this is a more or less blank steel panel. There's no sound dampening material or anything there, but there is a large vent down at the bottom, and that is to help with airflow past the power supply shroud and up through the top and into the case, and directing airflow to the graphics card. Because on top of the power supply shroud there is a large vented area here and two places for 120mm fans. In terms of the rest of the cooling, the power supply shroud has had a redesign, as well as the mesh on the top. Now the front of this is completely ultra fine mesh, and it is vertical and also slants backwards at an angle, and all that is ultra fine mesh, so there's airflow potential in through the power supply shroud here. With the panels off, you can see at the front it supports up to 3 120mm fans, or two 140s, or up to a 360mm radiator on the front panel. So that includes a 120, a 240, potentially a 280, or a 360 radiator at the front. The top you can't fit a 360 in, but in here you can either fit a 240mm radiator, two 120 or two 140mm fans. But if you have low profile RAM, you should be able to fit a 280mm radiator on the top. At the back, the case comes with a single 120mm fan, same type of fan as the front. You can only install a 120 fan on here. NZXT doesn't say there's any support officially for radiators on the back, so I'd just class that as a 120mm fan mount only. The motherboard tray supports up to eATX motherboards up to 277mm wide. That obviously also includes standard ATX, micro ATX, and also mini ITX motherboards. In terms of graphics card, you can install a graphics card up to 410mm long, and the maximum CPU cooler height is 170mm tall. Also in this side of the case, there's some cable management features, so there's a couple of cutouts at the bottom. There's a large cutout down the side of the motherboard tray, but it's covered by this panel which hides the cables coming through and connecting up to the motherboard. And then there's a long cutout at the top of the motherboard tray there for cable management. You notice that none of these cutouts have grommets in place, they're just open cutouts. There's a big vented section on top of the power supply shroud there. You can fit up to 220mm fans there. And at the rear, there's 7 horizontal PCIe slots. There's no official support for vertical graphics card mounting in the H5 Flow. At the back, it's a traditional mid-tower layout, so you've got the rear I/O for the motherboard cut out there, 120mm fan mount, but that vent expands right down to the bottom, so it's a really open and vented rear of the case. Then there's 7 horizontal PCIe slots, and at the bottom there is the mount for an ATX power supply. Turn the case round to the right hand side. There's not much going on here. You can see the cables for the front I/O connect to a small PCB there. Those cables are white in the white version, which is good to see, and even some of the connectors have white connectors on the end of the cables. In the black version, the cables will be black. At the back of the motherboard tray, you've got about 20mm or so of cable management space. You can see the large cutout there for the 24-pin and the side connections to the motherboard. Top cutout there. Some eyelets here for tying cables to with zip ties. Then there's a central channel for cable management here with some Velcro straps pre-installed. Some more eyelets down here and another channel for the EPS cables up at the back of the case. At the bottom of the case, it's very low, you can see, to the floor, because it is a flat floor on this case, so that will be good for running the case on a carpet surface. You're not going to get any restriction with airflow to the power supply fan. You will in fact need to install the power supply with the fan facing upwards in this case, and it will pull air in through the top of the power supply shroud. Also on the floor of the case, just move the cables out of the way, is a small drive cage for hard drives. There's 2 positions you can install this. That's the further back position that gives you more space to drop a radiator down at the front, or you can pull it out and move it slightly forward, which gives you more space for a power supply and cable management. You can, if you want, completely remove this drive cage. On here, you can install 2 2.5-inch SSDs in the bottom and then a 3.5-inch drive on the top. Maximum power supply size is ATX up to 210mm long.
As a world-leading manufacturer, CyberPower PC UK expertly builds each PC with the largest range of parts available in the UK. We handle all your packages with care and ship them directly to you on next day delivery. Visit cyberpowersystem.co.uk.
Then just flip the case over so you can see the floor. You can see this angled part of the power supply shroud there with the ultra-fine mesh on. Again, there's no dust filter for that. The ultra-fine mesh acts as a dust filter too. The floor of the case, there isn't much going on at all. All this section is completely flat. There's just a couple of rails there for the hard drive mount, and you can see also there's 4 anti-vibration feet, so 1 on each corner of the case in a triangular shape, so it is reasonably stable when the case is upright. The only accessories that come with the case come inside this little cardboard box. Inside here you get a few zip ties and all the mounting screws needed for the hardware installation. For the test system build, I've used an Intel Core i7-14700K CPU, hot running CPU, so it's good for thermal testing. Motherboard is a Z790 Aorus Elite AX Ice from Gigabyte. Graphics card is the Inno3D RTX 4080 Super X3 OC White. Memory is 64GB of G.Skill Ripjaws M5 RGB DDR5 6400 mega transfers per second. For storage, it's just a single 1 1TB Corsair MP700 PCIe Gen 5 NVMe M.2 SSD. The CPU cooler is the new NZXT Kraken Elite 280. It's the latest version, the 2024 version, just recently released that. It's got a really nice looking LCD display on there. Power supply is the NZXT C1000 Gold ATX3 compatible, 80 plus gold certified. For case fans, it's the stock fans that come with the case, so the 120 in the front and the 120 in the rear. I've also added for thermal testing one of these NZXT F240 RGB core fans. So these are two 120 fans that are joined together. I ran some thermal tests with that installed and without, so that's working as an intake, so it's pulling in some cool air from the power supply shroud at both sides and then aiming it right up at the graphics card. I've got a couple of things to mention about the case and the installation process, but first let's look at the thermal performance. If you want to check out the full testing methodology, there's a written review page over at kitguru.net. All the testing methodology is on there. For the thermal load, it's a combined Cinebench R23 and 3D Mark Speedway stress test run simultaneously for 30 minutes. We tested the H5 Flow using a 280mm AIO installed in the roof with fans as exhaust, along with the stock 120mm fans that come included with the case, and in some scenarios we added two 120mm fans to the power supply shroud as intake. In the default configuration with just the included 120mm fans, the H5 Flow adequately cools both the CPU and GPU. In fact, it does such a good job of cooling the 4080 Super that the graphics card fans barely have to ramp up to keep the GPU core at optimal temperature. So the system ran very quiet during all tests. Changing the configuration from the default by removing panels had a very small effect on CPU temperature. The most noticeable CPU temperature change is when the front and top mesh is removed, as this completely removes the airflow restriction to the intake and AIO exhaust. But still, the CPU temperature only drops by 4 degrees max, so it's not a huge gain. Adding two 120mm intake fans running at 1000 RPM to the power supply shroud produced a minor drop in GPU temperature, but only 2 degrees C, so compared with the default configuration, it may not be worth the extra cost of adding more fans. However, the mesh power supply shroud is useful as the GPU can draw in cool air from here using its own built-in fans, so it's a worthwhile feature to have in the case. Overall, the thermal performance is impressive, especially considering this is a hot CPU pulling around 250 watts package power.
If you're looking for a new chair, then definitely go and check out boolies.co.uk. They offer a whole host of gaming and office chairs that come in a variety of different finishes and different colours.
So back to the installation process. It's really easy, simple and straightforward installation in the H5 Flow. There's nothing that really jumps out at me as being a serious problem with the case. There's plenty of space underneath the power supply shroud, so if you want to put in your power supply, then connect up cables, plenty of space to do that. You can reach in and get to all the modular connections on the back of the power supply, no problem. All the screw alignment, so the motherboard screws, PCIe slots, all that lines up really well. It's a really solid feeling case. It feels decent build quality, especially for this price. There's also good cable management features around the right hand side, plenty of space between the motherboard tray and the back, or the side panel I should say, and there's plenty of straps to strap cables down and eyelets to use zip ties to tie cables in place, so all that's really good. Only a couple of really minor things. So top AIO installation is pretty tight. NZXT says a 240 will fit no problem and a 280 depending on the height of your RAM, but I actually found that the motherboard I/O shroud at the back of the motherboard up the top corner there was the limiting factor here. I could install a 280mm AIO. The RAM that I'm using is about 40mm tall. That was fine for clearance, but it is really close to that rear I/O shroud there, so it means you can't push the AIO really back this way. You have to have it more central, which isn't a problem, but you just have to be careful where you position it. The only other thing worth mentioning really is this cable cover on the side of the motherboard tray here. If your 24-pin cable has those really thick and chunky and quite stiff heat shrinks near the actual connector, it's quite awkward getting the cable through and bending it into position. You have to bend it at quite a severe angle to get it past this metal cover here and then plug it into the 24-pin, but it's not a massive problem. Just bit more fiddly more than anything. As I say, you can't knock the build quality for this price. Other things I would have liked to have seen is a removable top radiator bracket. I actually forgot to plug in one of the connectors at the top of the motherboard. It was really awkward once the radiator's installed there. That's a feature I do like to see in all cases, really. There's no rubber grommets on the cable cutouts. It looked a little neater, the installation with those in there. And the only other thing really is the front I/O connectivity. I would have liked to have seen 2 USB Type A ports up there with the Type C port. I think that's the minimum requirement, really. But overall, it's a really solid, well-built case. Thermal performance is great. The hardware support is good. Big graphics cards, up to eATX motherboards. And it's reasonably priced at around £90 for the regular version and £109, £110 for the RGB version. So overall, NZXT has done a good job with the new H5 Flow. It's a good upgrade on the older one. And if you're thinking of buying this for a basic gaming build like this, I don't think you can go too far wrong at all. So that's the 2024 NZXT H5 Flow. Let me know what you think of the case in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to Kit Guru if you've not already done so. If you enjoy what we do here at Kit Guru and you want to help support us, you can always head over to the store, pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.